A violent storm forces a terrified woman into a quiet roadside cafe, and into the path of Jaden Crest, a struggling single father just trying to make it through another day. Drenched, shaking, and clearly running from something, the woman, Seline, can barely whisper a plea for help. Jaden, moved by compassion he can't quite explain, gives her the hot meal he had barely been able to afford and wraps his own jacket around her trembling shoulders. She reveals nothing about her past, clutching only a small camera as if it's the last piece of her life she still owns. When she disappears into the rain, Jaden fears she's walking back into whatever nightmare drove her there. But before we dive into what happens next, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from today? Drop your country in the comment below and please like the video. Thank you. Now let's continue. The storm came out of nowhere, roaring across the sky until rain hammered the windows of the small roadside cafe. The place was usually buzzing with early customers, but now it felt hollow, quiet, and cold. Only one person occupied a booth near the corner. Jaden Crest, a weary father with rough palms and worry etched into his face, had finally scraped together enough money to buy himself a real breakfast after surviving for weeks on cheap snacks. Just as he lifted his fork, the door swung open. She appeared like a shadow swept in by the wind. Drenched, shaking, her hair stuck to her face as though the rain refused to let her go. A woman whose pain reached the room before her voice ever could. Her clothes were damaged as if she had run through a nightmare, her lips drained of color. When the server gently asked what she needed, her voice cracked, barely audible over the storm. Help, please. If you believe compassion can still change lives and that broken hearts can find healing, remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our page, Warm Souls. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Jaden didn't know what pulled him up from his seat. Maybe it was survival recognizing survival. Maybe it was the exhaustion in her eyes that reflected pieces of his own. Or maybe it was his little girl, Leora, and her innocent words echoing in his mind. Daddy, being kind is like sharing your light with someone who lost theirs. Whatever the impulse was, he carried his untouched meal to the trembling stranger. He placed the plate before her gently. Take it, he said quietly, his voice laced with concern. You need this more than I do. Her hands were unsteady as she accepted it. She wasn't just starving. She looked broken in ways food alone couldn't mend. She ate quickly, tears slipping down her face and blending with the droplets still clinging to her skin. Jaden felt a tightness in his chest grow heavier. He sat across from her without touching his own drink, studying her with silent worry, as though she might crumble right there. Eventually, she whispered her name. Seline. She offered nothing else. No past, no explanation, no reason for the fear lingering in her expression. Jaden didn't push. He recognized the heavy quiet people carry after life has scarred them. He had lived in that kind of silence once, after Leora's mother died and left him drowning in responsibilities he wasn't ready for. When Seline finished eating, she didn't move. She stared at the empty wrapper, as though standing up would take away the small safety she had found. The rain eased outside, but her breaths were still shaky and uneven. Jaden pulled out his phone and called Leora's school to say he would be late picking her up. Jaden noticed Seline trembling, so he slipped off his worn jacket and offered it to her, even though the cold instantly crawled up his arms. When she tried to hand it back, he simply draped it around her himself. The way her eyes widened made him realize kindness might have been a stranger to her for a very long time. They remained in the cafe for nearly an hour, sitting in the warm hush of clinking dishes and distant conversations. Slowly, Celine's rigid posture eased. Her fingers stopped shaking. The panic in her face softened, though a shadow of fear still lingered in her gaze. She admitted she had no wallet, no phone, nothing except a small camera she held tightly as though it was her last piece of the world. Jaden offered to drive her somewhere she would feel safe, but her entire body tensed at the suggestion. She shook her head sharply. She didn't offer a reason, and Jaden didn't push for one. Instead, he placed the little change he had left on the table for her to use later. The gesture meant he wouldn't have enough for his own dinner, but the gratitude in her voice when she whispered thank you made the sacrifice feel small. When Seline rose to leave, Jaden felt a strange heaviness settle in his chest, as if watching her walk away meant losing someone to a darkness she had barely escaped. At the door, she paused, turning back for a brief second. Her eyes shimmered with something he couldn't quite decipher, something fragile and haunting. Then she stepped outside and dissolved into the fading light. Jaden didn't see her again. Not that evening, not throughout the week, not even after the month changed. Yet the aftermath of that morning was already reaching toward him in ways he didn't expect. 3 weeks later, he found a letter in his mailbox. It was sleek, official, the type of envelope he had only seen in legal dramas. His stomach tightened at the sight. Lawyers didn't contact men who barely managed their bills unless something serious had happened. Bad news was the only thing he could imagine. His fingers trembled as he tore it open. Inside was a brief, formal note. Mr. Crest, your presence is required at the Varon and Hale Law Office regarding an urgent and personal matter involving Miss Seline Varon. Seline. The woman from the cafe. The woman who had vanished into the storm's aftermath. He read the letter again and again, the words blurring as his mind raced. Why would attorneys be reaching out to him? What had happened to her? Was she in danger? Was he somehow the last person who had helped her, the final witness to her safety? Guilt and anxiety churned in his stomach. But he couldn't ignore it. He needed to know the truth. The next morning, after dropping Leora at school, he took the bus across the city to a towering building of glass and steel that seemed to swallow the sky. Inside, everything was polished to perfection. People in sleek suits hurried past him, and Jaden felt painfully aware of his worn jeans, his patched jacket, and the roughness of his hands. An assistant escorted him to a quiet conference room with a sweeping view of the city. Jaden clasped his hands together to stop them from shaking. 2 attorneys entered moments later, placing a thick file on the table between them. Mr. Crest, the older one said with a calm tone, we represent Ms. Seline Varon. Jaden leaned forward anxiously. Is she all right? She is safe, the man replied, and much of that is because of what you did. Relief hit him so hard he had to grip the table to steady himself. But his confusion remained. I don't understand. Why am I here? The lawyers shared a quiet glance. Then the younger attorney pulled a photograph from the folder and slid it toward him. It showed Seline smiling brightly, elegantly dressed, posed in front of a prestigious-looking art exhibition. The confident, radiant woman in the picture looked nothing like the frightened stranger he remembered from that rainy morning. Jaden stared, stunned. It was like looking at 2 different lives held in one pair of hands. Jaden swallowed hard. I didn't do anything special. To her, you did everything, the lawyer replied. The attorney opened the rest of the folder. Inside were documents, papers, and a letter written in a delicate, familiar script. Jaden. When I walked into that cafe, I was running from a nightmare I wasn't sure I would survive. You didn't ask who I was or what I carried. You simply gave me warmth when I had nothing but fear. I owe you more than you know. Please allow me to return the light you shared. Seline. Attached to the letter were 2 things. A bank document showing a fully paid scholarship for Leora's future education, and a simple note stating she wished to meet him again, if he chose to. Jaden's throat tightened. He blinked hard, feeling warmth spread through him, something tender and unexpected. Months later, on a calm summer evening, he stood with Leora at a local art gallery. The doors opened, and Seline stepped inside, healthy, steady, and smiling in a way that reached her eyes. She approached him slowly, her camera hanging from her neck, her gaze soft. I kept your jacket, she said with a small laugh. And I have a feeling I owe you far more stories than just one. Jaden smiled back, something gentle unfurling in his chest. Maybe we can trade stories, he replied. And in the golden glow of the gallery lights, their paths, once crossing by chance, finally began moving forward together. A beginning born from a single act of kindness. Before you scroll, please hit that subscribe button. Your support is the reason I keep creating stories like this.